Hey there, this is Philip from Beyond the Tabletop. This is a first in a new video series covering a build guide for the Gorgon Armoured Transport. The Gorgon Transport comes from Forgeworld. I happen to have a very old kit that I bought over 2 years ago from Forgeworld, still in its original packaging. At the time of recording, it is currently out of production, but as far as I know, it's coming back into production sometime in 2018. Now, the instructions are pretty basic, so this build guide is going to cover how I've built it and hopefully go into a little bit more detail where there's a few niggling issues. So hopefully this will be a great starting place for anyone that does happen to have one and wants to build it, or anyone that's just interested in seeing how one is built. Now here it is in its original jiffy bag packaging. You tend not to see this with new kits nowadays, they tend to come in nice boxes. So if this does come back into production, it's likely not to look like this and is going to be in a box. So let's just start by opening this up and showing you all the parts. Now the first bag out is the weapon sponsons. Now there's two versions of a Gorgon. One has mortar sponsons on the side and then the other one has two side sponsons either side. That's the version I've got. Now, the last time this was in production, you were actually able to buy one kit that had both options. Unfortunately, I missed out on that because I bought it before then. So in theory, if you had both, you should be able to magnetise them. And I'll talk about that more as I go along in the build project. Now, two of the largest pieces are the internal side walls that mount onto the track units. Now here is another small bag containing all the small parts. We'll look at this in a bit more detail later. There's a bag with the much larger parts, including the prow and then the crew section at the back, along with the very bottom of the kit. In this air bubbled bag, you've got the two main track units. And again, you've got the old school style instructions, which are just effectively photocopied bits of paper. You've got a complete components list showing you what everything looks like. Also talks here about the two different sponson options, the mortar or the weapon sponsons. So you'll either have one or potentially both, depending on when you bought it. Then looking at the first page of instructions, this is what I'm going to be using to do the build. And then you've got the second page of instructions. And the final page of instructions. Now, before we start this project, you need to make sure you wash all your resin in warm soapy water, along with filling in any air bubbles, removing things like the casting gates, fixing or removing any mould lines that you see, and also straighten any bent resin. Now you'll see that I've already done that on the majority of my pieces, so you'll see lots of green stuffing where there's been issues. I've already done a few videos on how to do those, so check out my beginner's guide to resin playlist, which you'll see in the top right hand corner. So let's get on with the build. Initially we need the two track units and the two side hole units, as well as the individual track links. So here is my right track unit. So the casting gate was originally here, so I've just cut that out and smoothed it off as much as possible. So you just need your extra track link, and then that should just slot in and cover it. Now you can see there's a bit of a gap, so when the track link is getting glued down, I'll just have to squash it down as close as possible, and then I'll be green stuffing the rest of the gaps. So there's a few issues with this track piece. One of them is the edges here, as you can see, are quite delicate, and one of them had snapped off, and actually it happened on a couple of places on this one, so it happened here as well, and I had a similar issue on the other track unit. So to fix the track link issue, I basically created a press mold using something called blue stuff, and from there I could cast up this track link. It didn't have to be the whole track link, it just literally had to be this kind of quarter just here. And from there I could just carefully reattach it and glue it back in, and then use some green stuff just to touch it up and to sort of hide the seam line as much as possible. However, you're only ever really going to notice this when you pick it up and look at it from below. But just for a completionist's sake, I decided to try and make these little fixes just to make sure my kit looked as good as possible. There was one other issue on the back, and this was actually a really bad mould slip, and this was maybe a couple of millimeters out of sync. So this section here was up here. So I'd cut along where the mould slip was, and then I just repositioned this down, glued it in place, and then I just green stuffed all the way around, filling in the gaps sanding this bit down so this shouldn't be too noticeable once it's painted, and just green stuffing the gap here. The reason why I fixed this is because you're going to be able to visibly see this from the back of the tank. If you look at the top, you can see a really bad mould slip carrying on all the way along. Now this isn't actually a problem because this is going to be hidden by the hole. So if I take the corresponding right hole and place these together, you can see that where the mould slip is, it's just under here, so it's going to be completely hidden. Here is the left-hand unit, and I just need to do exactly the same here. You can see where there's been some mould slips on the bottom and where I've lost a track piece. There's a sort of really bad mould slip here, but again it's on the bottom, so not a huge issue. I have to say, with all these mould slips, it sort of seems very bad from Forgeworld quality control. However, this was over 2 years ago. It was at the very end of the life cycle of Gorgon before it went out of production, so the moulds I imagine were pretty bad at the time. However, this has probably been the worst piece. Actually, the rest of the kit is pretty good. So again, you can see where I had that really bad mould slip and how I had to go about fixing it by cutting along and just repositioning that piece, as well as filling in a few gaps and a few broken pieces. The rest of the track is all really good on this one. So again, with this, I just need to take this piece and stick it together. So I've managed to glue on the track piece. With this one, I glued it directly on and just green stuffed the edges just to seal it all in. On this one, however, there was a lot more of a gap between the track link and the track unit, so I actually put some green stuff down on the whole of the inner track piece and then did some super glue just around, and then I could attach that on. And then I've just touched up the green stuff all the way around, just on both sides. The next step is to attach the track unit to the hull. This is the inner piece. I'll just quickly go over some issues that I had with these pieces. There was a few small bits missing. So for example, this notch had come off, so I just recreated that with green stuff, then green stuffing and just shaving down a few of the edges. With this front edge here, this is where the casting gate joins, so that just needs some green stuffing and sanding down. What you need to do is take this front piece and attach it to the track, and that will give you the depth that you need to sand the whole block down to. So if we just look at the left hand piece and clip this in, you can see just here, this needs sanding down some more just to give it a good flush finish. This left hand piece, you can see that this bracket had broken off, so I just had to recreate that with green stuff. And again, this is the bar that it's going to attach to. So you can see how it's meant to fit on here. If I just sit this in, you can see how I've used it as a guide for recreating that shape. There's probably still a little bit of green stuffing just to do on the top, just to smoothen it out. But as you can see, I've sort of cut and sanded away on either side just to smoothen that out. So for now it's okay, but I will do a touch up later on. And on this side you can see another notch had been knocked off, so again I've just recreated that with green stuff. The next step is to attach the two pieces together. So these do just clip in like so, but this wasn't as easy as it looked, and in fact it was quite difficult on one of these pieces. So originally I couldn't even fit the track onto the hull, it just wouldn't fit together. So there was a size difference going on here. This piece here was too big for the hull. Now this happens sometimes with resin kits due to the production method. Some parts can shrink and be slightly smaller than other parts, and this can be quite bad over time when different production molds get used and the shrinkage is more noticeable. So when this piece needs to fit in here, it was just too big and wouldn't fit. So I did two things that I had to do. I had to really trim this down to be a bit smaller, and what you can see here is this little lip here I've actually created by carefully filing this down. It was originally the same height as the section on the left hand side, so it's actually a good millimetre, maybe even 2 millimeters that I've had to remove. It was a bit time consuming, but I managed to use my mould remover tool, and just by scoring this along and repeatedly doing that, and that created enough of a gap. And then I also did that sort of slightly all the way around, but also by doing it on this inside, just by scoring the mould line remover all the way around, just to try and widen this hole and also remove this one. If I just bring in the other track unit, you can see I've ever so slightly scored this one down, and you can see the difference between the two. The left-hand one in comparison fitted really easily. So if I just attach these two bits together, they will need gluing in. However, it might be best to not glue this just yet, because you might want to prime this inner section and along these tracks. Obviously these bits won't be visible, so you don't need to paint them up, but it might just be better to prime them first and trying to paint up that small track section while it's in this whole unit will be a lot more difficult than if you just paint this whole section up separately. So for now I'm not going to glue these two bits together. However, this is all down to personal preference, so you might want to glue it together now. So far we've covered just step 1 of the build. Now we're on to step 2, which involves the driver and the cab. I'm going to cover the cab and the driver in the next video. As always, if you've enjoyed this video, please give it a like or share it with your friends. If you've got any questions about this build, just hit me up in the comments below and I'll happily answer them. Until the next time, take care.